On today's show, the Atlanta Hawks fall just short at home against the Milwaukee Bucks on this Wednesday evening. We'll get into all of what transpired in this one, but the Hawks were basically unable to dig out of a massive hole in the first half. They did come back, took the lead for about 22 seconds in the fourth quarter, and then it was not quite enough to get over the hump. We'll get into why that happened, what happens next, and the newest addition to the Hawks roster in Derrick Favors. All of that and more coming up.
You are Locked On Hawks, your daily Atlanta Hawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 1388 of the Locked On Hawks podcast. I am your host, Brad Rowland, coming to you on a Wednesday evening into Thursday. And I thank you, as always, for listening to the Locked On Hawks podcast and making us your first listen each and every day. Check out the Locked On Hawks podcast across platforms. That includes Apple Podcasts and Spotify, as well as Stitcher, TuneIn Radio, Odyssey, Google Play, and we are also on YouTube over on the video side. And today's show, we'll get into mostly what transpired between the Hawks and the Milwaukee Bucks. A close-fought loss for Atlanta at home, 114-105. The Hawks were in the game. If you didn't see this one, it was certainly a roller coaster ride. The Hawks were down by 20 in the first quarter. They're down by 24 with 20 minutes to go, and they came all the way back to very briefly lead. And it was one of those circumstances where, yes, the Hawks did not play well down the actual stretch of this game, but it was an instance where I certainly would put more of the onus on the first quarter because it is very hard to keep up the level of intensity and execution that it requires to come back from down by 24 points in the second half of the game. You have to be perfect from that point forward. And the Hawks were pretty darn good until about the last 4 or 5 minutes, and that was the end of that. But we'll get into all of what transpired in this one, my evaluations, my analysis, what actually happened in this one, back and forth, the numbers, and then we'll end the podcast with some talk about the newest addition to the Hawks in Derrick Favors. But we'll get into the game now. This is the fourth and final game between the Hawks and the Bucks this year. They also played twice in Abu Dhabi. So the Hawks have basically played the Bucks 6 times in about a 3-month period, which is a pretty crazy for a non-divisional opponent. But that all happened. The Hawks are now actually 2-2 against the Bucks this year, so not too bad against a very, very good team. Also, they won without Trae Young previously, which comes into play here because the Hawks were playing without Trae Young in this game as well. I will say the Bucks have not been great this year. They did start the season off very well at 9-0, and they're still awesome defensively. But without Chris Middleton on offense, they are pretty average, maybe even below average on offense at this point in time, which definitely happened again in this game. As for the injury report for the Hawks, again, Trae Young missed this game with non-COVID illness. He was listed as questionable as of 1 o'clock on Wednesday after not being on the injury report at all on Tuesday, and then he was ruled out about a half hour later. Naaman Millen said he just woke up not feeling well, which I understand. It's non-COVID related by all accounts, but the Hawks needed him in this game. They didn't have him, and one of those things where like Trae hates missing games. It's a national TV game on ESPN. Obviously, he's feeling pretty ill to not be in the building and not be playing in this one. But now without Trae and Capella this season, if you include tonight's game, the Hawks are 2-3 without Trae. They are 4-10 without Capella, and they are 0-3 without both of them. So that kind of paints the picture of the most important offensive player in Trae, most important defensive player in Capella, and being without both of those guys is pretty tough. I will say on the Capella front, Landry Fields did his first public interview since the changeover with Travis Schlenk stepping down, and he gave it to 92.9 in the game, the official radio partner of the Hawks. And nothing huge there, but he did say that they're ramping Clint Capella back up, and, quote, at this point, it's more of a day-to-day thing, end quote. So that's not a huge thing in terms of specificity, but I will say that the Hawks have not given really any updates at all about Capella, so that's at least a small thing to point out on that front. Anyway, as for the game itself, our friends at BetOnline made the Hawks, with Trae in the lineup early in the day, the Hawks were about a 2-point underdog, and by tip-off, they were a 4.5-point underdog at home, which, that's a pretty big move, but Trae Young is very important. So the big thing, honestly, I talked about the first quarter already, but if you want to just say the Hawks lost this game in the first 2 minutes, I might agree with you, to be honest. It was 13-0 Milwaukee out of the gate. The first 11 points were in the first 100 seconds for Milwaukee. The Hawks went 0-for-3 on possessions to start the game, turnover, and then 2 missed jump shots. The Bucks made their first 4 shots, including 3 straight threes, forced a timeout. Then the Bucks scored again, and the Hawks didn't score for like 3 minutes to start the game. So again, down 13-0 in a game you lose by 9. That's indicative in some respects. The offense was not good early on, but the defense took a long time to settle in as well. They gave up 18 points on the first 10 possessions defensively, which is not going to get it done most of the time. They finally got some stops and got back within 7 and showed some life, but there was not a whole lot of flow offensively. Some settling, hesitations, not really attacking all the way to the rim. And the Bucks are fantastic in protecting the paint. That has to be said. Brook Lopez and Giannis form arguably the best back line in the entire league. But you can't just give in to them, take a bunch of mid-range shots, which happened for the Hawks in this game. Rotationally, not a ton of surprises. They started Aaron Holiday, which did not surprise me at all. I know Hawks fans, not everyone, but Hawks fans were very unhappy with that decision. As I've said for a long time, and I'll say again now for new listeners, I don't really care who starts for the most part. There are certain instances where I don't love certain things, but it's more important as to who plays more minutes and who closes games. Aaron Holiday started in this game, which I know is a little bit weird with Bogdanovich and AJ Griffin on the team, but Aaron Holiday played 14 minutes in this contest. He played the fewest minutes of anyone that played for the Hawks, and he started. So, like, who starts doesn't really matter. Bogey played 40 minutes off the bench. So, obviously, he was in more of a starter role than Aaron Holiday was, and I do understand the consternation, but not a big deal in my mind. Anyway, Jalen Johnson came in from there for Collins. Frank Kaminsky, who had his best game as a Hawk, in my opinion, tonight, and then AJ Griffin came in as well, and that was the 9-man rotation for this game. No deeper than that. No Justin Holiday, no Derrick Favors, as we'll get into later on, or anybody else that was available for Atlanta in this contest. The other big run in the first quarter was a 12-2 push by Milwaukee mid-quarter, but the Hawks down by 17 points, and really the shot quality difference was hugely stark. We'll get into this in a second as well, but Milwaukee was very hot from three, and that happens sometimes. But the Hawks' shot quality was not good. In fact, they took 13 of their first 18 shots were between 4 feet and like 22 feet. That area, but that's kind of the low percentage area on the court. And Milwaukee was forcing them to shoot from that range a lot. The Hawks were down by 22 points at one point in the first quarter, down 20 at the end of the first, gave up 39 points in that quarter. Defensively, it was really ugly. The Bucks, who again are not great offensively this year, scored 1.5 points per possession. That is ridiculous. They got any shot they wanted to in the first quarter, only had one turnover. They were hot again with 9 threes. Yes, 9 threes in the first quarter, but they were largely really good looks. So it's kind of like you can't expect them to miss too many of those. And then the offense was horrible too. A 73 offensive rating. They attempted 22 shots in the first quarter, and 16 of them came from that range that we talked about a second ago, between 4 feet and 3-point line. All of that process was bad. All of the execution was bad. And again, I think the Hawks lost this game in the first 12 minutes, more so than they did down the stretch of the contest, because it all adds up in the end. Anyway, to the second quarter, they got some better looks. They played better, generally speaking. And honestly, if the game started at the end of the first quarter, the Hawks would have won it. And they were not bad at any point, really, in the second half or really the last 3 quarters. Defensively, they had a questionable lineup out there. It actually got some better looks early on with Murray, Griffin, Bogdanovich, plus Kaminsky playing at the 5. Better spacing there. The Stars came back in a little bit earlier than usual because they had 2 days off and they were down by 18 and kind of pressing. They did hold the Bucks down to only 5 points in the first 4 minutes of the second quarter. They got down to 13 at one point. AJ Griffin has the best stretch of the game. He scored 5 straight points for Atlanta, and he and Kaminsky hit the first 2 threes of the night for Atlanta after they did not make one in the first quarter. The Hawks were certainly better on both ends of the floor, but they were still running into that brick wall that is Brook Lopez and Giannis around the rim. There was another 12-2 run, though, by the Bucks late in the first half to break it open, and Bogdanovich had a buzzer beater to cut it to 21. So they were done by 24 with about 30 seconds to go in the first half. And again, the performance, the numbers were really ugly, especially for the full half. Most of that was the first quarter, because the second quarter they were totally fine. They allowed 12 threes. That's a really bad number. And they held Giannis in check. That's kind of crazy. We'll come back to it. But Giannis was in check the entire game for Atlanta, and they still couldn't get stops for large swaths of this one. Offensively, they were better in the second quarter for sure. They had 5 threes and had 8 assists in that quarter. But, other than the turnover avoidance that the Hawks are so good at, that was kind of it. Murray was struggling. He was inefficient all the way through this game. Bogdanovich got going a little bit later, but it was not fantastic for most of the first half. They had that nice stretch from Griffin, but that was kind of all there was to speak of in the first half. And again, they were down by 21 points, and they actually had to have a buzzer beater to get to that close. But obviously, the second half was much more encouraging in some respects. We'll get into that in a second, as well as my takeaways from the game itself. But first, a word from our sponsors on the show today. Today's show is brought to you by Built Bar. If you're looking for delicious treats, but you don't want all the fat and calories, you are needing to try a Built Bar today. We just finished the holidays, of course, recently. I know one of my goals this year is to eat a little bit healthier. And if you're anything like me, you don't want to give up the taste. And that's really the fun part about eating a lot of ways, and you don't want to give that up to actually get healthier. But Built Bar is a perfect option if that is your problem, like it is for me with Built. Healthy is actually tasty, and they're so delicious that you won't believe that they're actually good for you as well. Built Bars are covered in 100% real chocolate. Yes, real chocolate, and they come in a ton of awesome flavors, like peanut butter brownie and coconut almond. And Built Bars also taste like candy bars with only 130 calories and 4 grams of sugar to go along with 17 grams of protein. And you also don't have to wait around and get a box today. For a long time, I've been telling you to get your Built Bars at Built.com, and you can still do that. In fact, it's an awesome way to get Built Bars. But you can also get those at at your local Walmart or Sam's Club. That's right. You can walk into a pharmacy section of a local Walmart right now and grab a box of Built Bars, including a 4-bar box of my personal favorite, cookies and cream. Or if you're closer to a Sam's, run in and get a 13-bar box. That's a lot of Built Bars in one place. Make sure to check it out right now. Built Bar across the board, Built.com, Sam's, Walmart, and start your new year right with Built Bar. All right, so the first salvo from Atlanta to kind of get back into this game happened pretty early in the third quarter. After a very lengthy clear path review, it took like forever in the first minute of the third quarter. The Hawks made a big dent with a 15-2 run. Okongwu was really good in that stretch, playing with physicality, attacking the rim. He had a very funny moving screen that was uncalled to clear the way for a basket. Bogey got going a little bit as well. He had 8 points in a row. Hunter had, I think, 2 jump shots that went down. I think he had 9 points in a short period of time. And the Hawks were within 11 when that run ended. So they were back in the game at that point. And in general, the Hawks were much more assertive on both ends of the floor, particularly on offense. I thought they were more effective and more attacking in that stretch. Also, Jalen Johnson had a good period of time where he did have a missed layup in there, but he had a 3. He had a huge dunk in transition over Javon Carter. And that dunk got the Hawks back within 9 for the first time since it was 20-11 in the first quarter. All told, the Hawks ended the third quarter on a 30-13 run to go from down by 24 to down by 7. As I said a second ago, the Hawks were down by 24 points with 20 minutes to go, and then chipped away. Milwaukee was really bad offensively in the third quarter. They shot 2 of 14 from 3 and 36% from the floor in that third quarter, whereas the Hawks were very efficient from the field, which is kind of what you have to do when you're down by 24 points and making up a big deficit. In the fourth, it was the bench lineup actually plus Aaron Holiday, so a true bench lineup in some ways. And they got the lead all the way down to 1 within the first 3.5 minutes. Kaminsky had a great stretch. He had a couple of threes. He was very effective, very skilled around the rim, of course, and also the shooting is very helpful for him offensively. And look, I've always said he's a very effective offensive player most of the time. It's the other end of the fourth, the question, but they did a good job defensively with that group. They were not good on paper defensively, playing that group with Griffin and Bogey and Kaminsky, but they were doing a good job being active and pesky. They forced 3 turnovers. Frank was using his hands effectively. It was a good stretch by everybody there. They did have a dry spell offensively and didn't score for like 3 minutes at the end of that run, but it didn't bite them too much. And when the starters came back in the game, they were only down by 3 points, I believe, with 6 minutes to go. They put Kaminsky back in a couple different times. That's kind of a risk, but he was pretty decent again the entire run. And after all that, Collins ties the game after a turnover and a run out in transition with 4 minutes to go. So the Hawks turned that deficit from 24 into 0 in about 15, 16 minutes of game time. So it's a pretty impressive run there. After that, obviously, it was all Milwaukee. But Murray had a bad turnover. He tried to throw like a perfect hit ahead pass to Collins, and it was a turnover that would have been for the lead, actually. They got to stop from there. And then after a timeout, the Hawks led for the one and only time in the entire game. Yes, the entire game. They led for 22 seconds. Bogey had a jump shot, and then the Bucks hit a 3 on the next possession. And that was the start of a 10-0 run by Milwaukee. Bogey, after he made one, which is important to remember, he forced one and missed it. They fouled Jrue Holiday. They got a pretty good look, actually, by DeAndre Hunter for 3. It wasn't a bad possession at all. He just missed it. And then Jrue got to the mid-range and scored. Bogey forced it again, one-on-one against Javon Carter. That was not a good shot at all. In fact, I thought Bogey in that stretch took 2 really bad shots in 3 possessions. And the Hawks, generally speaking, kind of just stopped attacking the paint in crunch time, which is unfortunate because that's kind of how they got back in the game. It just kind of stopped at that point. And then Carter hits a 3 to force a timeout. And within seconds, it felt like the Hawks went from up 1 to down 8. They did catch a break, actually, after that, after a timeout, because Milwaukee fouled Hunter on a 3, but he only made 2. And then the Hawks were trying to foul Giannis, actually, I think smartly, because Giannis was not really in a mode to be scoring or shooting, but they couldn't actually execute that. Jrue took the entire shot clock and then made a very tough contested jump shot over Hunter. And that was it, basically, because they were up by 8. And it's kind of like, Murray shot an air ball, and that was really it. But it was really over when Jrue hit that shot in my mind. So after all that, the Hawks did come back all the way, took a lead briefly, and then the 10-0 run kind of slammed the door shut in their face, despite some positive performances down the stretch. So broadly speaking, the offense was not good enough in this game. Now, you should adjust this for A, no Trae, and B, the Bucks. The Bucks are awesome defensively, and Trae, for all of his individual struggles by his standards this season, is still a very good offensive player, obviously, and being without him is important. The Hawks, though, were below average basically across the board. They did start shooting threes, actually, after the first quarter, and I would say not a coincidence that things got better for the Hawks after that. But they still took almost as many shots from that long 2 range as they did from 3 and the rim combined, which is not a good shot profile. Not enough free throw creation. They basically got nothing on the glass in this game offensively. They took care of the ball as they almost always do, but that was kind of it on offense. And then defensively, it was a 115 defensive rating against a pretty bad Bucks offense without Chris Middleton. That's not good, but after the first quarter, it actually was like legitimately good defensively. They held Giannis to 7 points in 35 minutes. I know Okongwu has been credited with a lot of that, and he should be. He's always done great against Giannis. But Collins, Jalen Johnson, even Kaminsky was frisky defensively by his standards in this game. So a good job by everybody there involved. The Bucks also, after opening up 9 of 14 from three, and I will say, there's always a little bit of noise with 9 of 14 from three. But those were always really good looks in that stretch. The rest of the game, they were 9 of 34 from three. So sub 25% from three-point range. Around there anyway, 27% from three. That's bad. And then they only gave up 11 free throw attempts in this game, did the Hawks. So they defended without fouling, which is hard to do against Milwaukee, in particular Giannis. They did lose the glass in this game, but not in a terrible way. If you look at the raw rebounding totals, yes, the Bucks had a lot more rebounds than the Hawks did. The Hawks missed a lot more shots than the Bucks did. And I think if you look at the percentages, yes, the Hawks did nothing on the offensive glass in this game. Defensively on the glass, the Hawks were honestly about average, which is all you can really ask for without Capella against this particular Bucks team. Overall, I thought the Hawks legitimately played like a B-plus game after the first quarter, but you can't think of it that way. The Hawks, and I know there's this like narrative out there, the Hawks just have these terrible starts. They have had some terrible starts this year, no question about that. But if you look at the net rating by quarter, it's not like slanted too badly. They've had too many of these stretches where they're bad. And tonight was the first quarter. And, when you're playing a good team, you're playing against a good team like Milwaukee, no matter what their faults are, you cannot afford to spot them 20 points. And it was 24 points, and it was 11 points in the first, a minute and a half. It was just, they got down too much and had to expend too much energy to come back, and they were not able to go ahead and do that. But, I will say, taking a step back and just say, okay, before the game, if this happened 6 hours ago, you knew Trae and Clint were not going to be there, and the Hawks lose by 9 to the Bucks. That would not have felt like a terrible result. Is it a good result? No, but the Hawks were underdogs, even though they were at home in this game. You're without 2 of your top 3 or 4 players. And in a vacuum, it's totally fine. And again, if you watch the second half of this game, the Hawks were pretty good for large swaths of time. But the first quarter doomed them, and you got to play 4 quarters. I'm sure Nate said the same thing, and we'll say the same thing. But that's kind of all I have on that in terms of the game flow part. And the Hawks are now, again, on pace for 38 wins this season. No one is thrilled with that number. I can promise you that. But we are firmly at the halfway point, and that is the story of this one, is they're 19 and 22. So we'll get into all of the individual breakdowns in a second of how guys performed in this game, and then we'll end with Derrick Favors on the show. But first, stay tuned, and we'll be back after a word from our sponsors on today's show. Today's show is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. As a small business owner or hiring manager, the success in 2023 all depends on team members that you surround yourself with. And that's why you check out LinkedIn Jobs right now. With LinkedIn Jobs, you can hire qualified candidates more efficiently by matching open roles with people that actually have the skills, the values, and experiences that you're looking for to help you achieve your goals. I've used LinkedIn Jobs a few times already in the past, and I've really proven to be an awesome resource for me. Makes the hiring process easy and painless, and they help you attract the most qualified candidates to your open job with targeting tools. They make it easy to screen and rate your applicants based on your job qualifications, all in one platform. They go beyond the resume data by using insights from your job post, your company, and their millions of member profiles. Put your post in front of people for free, and they do it quickly in front of the most qualified possible candidates. We all have new goals in the new year, and really having more people around you is a huge thing in making that happen. So check out LinkedIn Jobs, and that would be a really wise decision for you. And by the way, small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering high-quality hires, according to leading competitors. And LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the most qualified candidates you want to talk to, and they help you do it faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA. One more time, that is linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA. Terms and conditions apply. All right, and we'll dive in now to the player portion of the podcast. Really, the bench was very good. And, as I've been saying all season long, the Hawks bench has kind of killed them at times. I think Atlanta's roster construction leaves a lot to be desired with regard to depth. And that's kind of why they haven't been able to withstand even 1 or 2 injuries at a time this season. But in this game, the bench was good. So we'll start with Frank Kaminsky, who I've, picked on a little bit this year. I think he's not been good really at all for Atlanta, but he was legitimately good in this game. Plus 13, a game best mark there for the Hawks. 13 points in 14 minutes. He hit 3 threes, and obviously that's a lot of the value, but he can do that. He's a good passer. He had 2 assists. He had an active hand steal at one point. Did have a turnover, but I thought Frank gave them really good minutes. And this is one of those games where, without Capella, Kaminsky is by far their biggest player. Now, obviously, Okongwu was a better defender. He's more, is more gifted than Kaminsky is defensively, and even feel wise, he's much better as well. But Kaminsky does have 7-foot size. That can be useful, and I think him on offense in this game helped them open some things up. So I don't want to go overboard. He didn't save the day here, but he did play well, and he was a big part of why the Hawks were able to come back in this spot. AJ Griffin, kind of a quiet game outside of that one stretch in the second quarter. Did have 7 points on 6 shots. That's totally fine. 2 rebounds and an assist. I think AJ might have been able to play a little bit more because Bogey was probably tired by the end, but Bogey kind of had it going in the second half at times. I think that, Hawks fans, I understand, always want to see more Griffin. I don't blame you. He's a very exciting young player. I think defensively, he leaves a lot to be desired right now, as does Bogey, obviously. But I thought AJ was fine. He didn't do anything crazy. He had the one nice floater and hit a 3 in the first half, but that was kind of it. Jalen Johnson had a good game. 12 points, 3 rebounds in 15 minutes. He was attacking the rim in that one stretch where the Hawks made their big run. And other than that, he was just fine. He did a decent job on Giannis. He was at least effective there, using his length, his size, his physicality, athleticism for the most part. I thought he played well. And then Bogdanovic had kind of a weird game, kind of a slow start, ends up with 22 points, had, I thought, a rough crunch time. But in the middle of those two things was quite good. Obviously, you get 22 points on 18 shots, 5 assists, had 2 steals. 2 turnovers is fine, +7. So defensively, it's an every night thing for him being a problem right now. But offensively, he was probably their best shot creator in this game, although that's kind of a low bar to clear, as we'll get into in a second. Dejounte Murray had a rough one. So clearly without Trae Young, you're looking to Murray to step up as the primary. It's a role that he's familiar with, dating back to his San Antonio days. And he was just bad in this game. There's no way around it. And a lot of hot take. I think this might be the night when Hawks fans are starting to turn a little bit more on Murray sometimes, which is probably not particularly fair. But I've said before that I don't think Murray has been up to what you kind of thought he might be. It doesn't mean he's been bad. The numbers look fine, but impact-wise, I don't think it's been jumping off the screen too much. In this game, 9 points on 16 shots. And I can stop there. It's really hard to be efficient and helpful offensively when you shoot like that. And he was 4-16 from the floor, 1 of 5 from 3, which means he was 3-11 on 2s. A lot of mid-rangers, 0 free throw attempts, just shot profile issues from Dejounte. He forces it. I think he was probably in too much of a forcing mode. 5 assists, which was a tie for the team high, but 3 turnovers as well. Not a crazy good ratio there either. Defensively, not great necessarily either. Did have 2 steals as he is wont to do, but I thought he was certainly not very good in this game. And that definitely let them down because, if that's all you knew, again, coming into the night was that Trae was out and Dejounte was going to do this, the Hawks would have probably been a pretty big underdog as they were in this spot. Aaron Holiday, quiet, 14 minutes, had 4 points, 3 assists. Thought he played totally fine. Him playing a small role was okay with me. But just kind of check that box of being perimeter defense oriented. He was their most pesky perimeter defender in this game, I thought. So that's kind of the best thing to point out there. Okongwu had a weird game. He was actually a game worst, minus 22, because he was off the floor when Frank was on the floor. Did have 2 blocks and 9 rebounds, 5 assists, actually, tying for the team lead. 7 points. Offensively, he was really passive early on. When the Hawks got going in the third, he was better and more physical, which I think is not a huge coincidence. Defensively, I thought he did a pretty good job after the first few minutes of this game. And even then, early on, it really wasn't him that was the problem, nor was it Collins. It was more the perimeter guys. But kind of a weird one for Okongwu. He wasn't great, but he did a good job on Giannis and did his job there and rebounded the ball and was effective enough. Collins, kind of a quiet 15-7. He was the third leading scorer, second leading rebounder in this game. He had a block, 7-11 from the floor. He was fine defensively, fine. Did a good job on Giannis when he had to. Did a good job on Brook when he had to. Just nothing jumps off the screen too much, but it was like a B game from Collins, C+ kind of thing, slightly above average. And then Hunter went in there, 16 points for Hunter on 18 shots when you include free throws. Now, I will say Hunter got to the line 8 times, which is by far the most on the team. That's a positive sign. He also had 7 defensive rebounds. That's a big sign for Hunter, who's not a great rebounder in his own right. 2 assists, 3 turnovers, not the best. Ball handling-wise, always some problems. He was forcing it a little bit offensively at times. I mean, I think probably with the instruction of the team without Trae, they kind of lean on him more than I probably would, generally speaking, in those shot creation moments. But I thought Hunter was fine. And then defensively, not great either. But he was okay. I thought that, generally speaking, the Hawks didn't play awesome, but the guys who had standout nights compared to their normal baselines were Kaminsky and Jalen Johnson. If you're looking at that kind of as the baseline of what to talk about this game, I think Frank had the biggest gap between his normal baseline, his performance. Jalen was after that. And then maybe you get into like Bogey kind of did bogey things for the most part. Collins was fine, that kind of stuff. But and then on the other side of the spectrum, I thought Murray was probably the worst compared to his baseline, which is not good timing for Murray in a spot where they kind of had to have him have a big game without Trae. All right. That'll do it for the game. There's one more piece of business here, and that is that Derrick Favors is on this roster, which is a little bit weird to talk about. I've been covering Derrick Favors for a very, very long time, dating back to high school. It was reported by Woj of ESPN, of course, on Tuesday evening that he was going to be signing a 10-day contract with the Hawks. It was not signed officially until Wednesday. I kind of figured this out last night and said it on Twitter. But if the Hawks waited until Wednesday to sign Favors, he actually gets to play 6 games versus 5. So it's kind of a no-brainer to wait for Atlanta. January 5th was the first day to sign 10-day contracts. And I speculated both before and on that date that the Hawks probably should sign another big with Capella out of the lineup and just kind of use that rotating door to both watch your cost, because the Hawks do care about that, even if I don't care if they do about that, and also just get some fresh talent in there. Favors has been out of the league this year. So I will say this. We don't know anything about what Favors is going to look like at this point. I don't think anybody does. Even McMillan today was kind of just like, he was around, he was close by, he's a vet, but there wasn't a whole lot of like, I'm not sure how much I've seen him play in the last little while. He finished last season with Oklahoma City, but actually didn't play at the end of the season for like 17 games with a reported back issue. Oklahoma City was tanking, so we'll see on that, but he's not the same guy he used to be. He did opt into a $10 million player option for this year, but he was then traded and waived by the Rockets, so it's a minimum 10-day contract. I will say he's only 31 years old, which is crazy. He's been in the league since 2010, so he came in very young, and he's not that old. He's a very young guy in terms of how long he's been in the league. But he spent a year at Tech, of course. He's a local product, played at South Atlanta High School, so lots of connections there. I would imagine that had a lot to do with him signing with Atlanta, to be honest with you. He was a very good starting big man in Utah at one point and has been a backup the last couple of years. He's not the same guy, but certainly knows how to play, knows how to be around the team, good locker room guy by all accounts, good physicality. He can rebound if he's out there. He didn't play in this game. That wasn't a huge surprise to me, but generally speaking, if you sign a guy to a 10-day contract that's as high profile as Derrick Favors, I think he'll probably see the floor at some point. I don't know when it's going to be, but we'll see. And obviously, Kaminsky was good in this game. So no downside. It's a 10-day contract. There's no risk with that. I saw people like kind of saying that this is like a situation where they're only doing this because Capella is having this terrible injury. And I don't know if that's true. I mean, maybe Capella's injury is worse than we think and worse than they're saying. That's possible for sure. But I think this is a situation where the Hawks knew for a while that they probably could or should use this spot on a 10-day contract guy on the front court. They're doing it now. Favors is a big enough name where like maybe he was the only guy they wanted. We'll see. But yeah, lots of questions to be answered. Landry Fields did say on that radio interview that I talked about earlier, they've been looking at Favors for a while. I believe that, to be honest, because he does kind of fit in a way that a lot of guys maybe wouldn't as a kind of low-maintenance backup big who's been around the block and adds that kind of veteran presence to the team. So huge impact, no, but certainly I would say almost assuredly the biggest name the Hawks could have signed with a 10-day contract. Maybe if they were to bring Dwight Howard back, that would be a bigger name, but he's not going back on a 10-day contract. So anyway, Favors been out of the league, so we'll see. He hasn't played in a game in almost a year in terms of the NBA. So a giant question mark about his actual play on the floor, but certainly nothing risky about it, and a move that I am totally fine with and kind of like from a speculation standpoint if I am the Hawks. All right, from there, obviously not the greatest way to end the first half of the season. Again, they are 19-22 through 41 games, but there's 41 more to go, and the Hawks have been a good second half team the last couple of years. Second half begins with a back-to-back with travel on Friday and Saturday. So this is a one-game homestand for Atlanta after the trip to California. From here, they go to Indiana for Friday's game and then to Toronto for Saturday's game. Interesting slate there. Indiana's playing pretty well this year. They're in the playoff mix. Toronto, you would think would be better than Indiana, but they haven't been so far this year. But that's a really tough back-to-back with customs and all of that going from Indianapolis to Toronto. So that's certainly a challenge. A split there would be totally fine. We'll see what Trae's status is if he's back and healthy by then. We'll see about Capella Friday and Saturday, but plenty to get to there. I'm not planning on doing another huge podcast between those two things. I should plug now. I did a 2-part deep dive NBA draft podcast with Brian Schroeder that dropped on Monday evening into Tuesday. People were mad at me about Scoot Henderson. And just for the record, I was not saying the Hawks couldn't possibly draft Scoot Henderson. I think that just pointing out that the Hawks have a lot of capital allocated to a point guard with regard to Trae Young and Dejounte Murray. But we'll have much more draft stuff in the future, I promise. and especially if the Hawks are going the other direction in these standings. But obviously, no one's really hoping for that at this point. Maybe some people are, but I'm not quite there if you're a Hawks fan. But no matter what, we'll have full ongoing coverage of the Hawks. I might take one of those games this weekend and combine it with Monday's game. We'll see about that schedule-wise. I have to travel over the weekend. I won't be in my normal situation. So TBD on that. But the best thing possible to check out the show and all of my coverage is to subscribe to the Locked On Hawks podcast across podcast platforms, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, YouTube, all those places. I also write about the Hawks on occasion at patreon.com/BTRowland. You can follow me on Twitter at BTRowland. Follow the show on Twitter at Locked On Hawks. I do appreciate everyone listening. Enjoy the rest of your Wednesday and Thursday, and we'll see you again after the game on Friday.